The cream-colored envelope felt heavier than a tombstone in my hands. The calligraphy was exquisite, looping Julian's name with another woman's in a delicate silver dance. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a summons. Inside, nestled against the formal request for my presence, was a personal handwritten note from him. He wasn't just inviting me to his wedding, he wanted me to be the wedding singer. He wanted me to stand before everyone we ever knew and perform the soundtrack to his new beginning, built directly on the ashes of ours. And the worst part, I knew I couldn't say no. The eviction notice was taped to my apartment door, a stark white rectangle against the peeling brown paint. It felt less like a notice and more like a final, damning judgment. 3 months overdue. I tore it down, the paper crinkling in my fist, a sound that echoed the brittle state of my finances and my spirit. Inside, my small apartment in Chicago's Logan Square was a landscape of my stalled life. My keyboard, a second-hand Yamaha, sat in the corner, gathering a thin film of dust. Sheet music and unpaid bills coexisted in precarious stacks on the coffee table. This was the reality Julian Thorne had left me in, a world away from the one we once shared. Just a year ago, I was Ilara Vance, the promising singer-songwriter, the muse to Julian Thorne, heir to the Thorne Industries fortune. We were the couple people envied, the artist and the aristocrat, a modern-day fairy tale set against the glittering backdrop of Chicago's elite. He'd found me at an open mic night at the Green Mill, a smoky, historic jazz club where I poured my soul into 3-minute songs for a handful of indifferent patrons. He'd seen something in me, he'd said, a fire that deserved a bigger stage. For 2 years, he was that stage. He funded my demos, connected me with producers, and filled the front row of every show with his influential friends. He didn't just support my dream, he became its architect. And I, blinded by love and gratitude, hadn't realized he was also building its cage. The breakup was as swift and brutal as an amputation. There was no argument, no dramatic final scene. Just a quiet, sterile conversation in his cavernous, art-filled penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. "It's just not working, Ilara," he'd said, his voice as smooth and emotionless as the marble countertops. He spoke of diverging paths and different priorities, corporate speak for, "You're no longer a good investment." He'd already moved on, I would later learn, to Isabel Sterling, a woman from his own world, whose father sat on the board of his company. My key card to the penthouse was deactivated the next day. The producers stopped returning my calls. The fairy tale was over. Now, holding this invitation, the past came crashing back with the force of a physical blow. Isabel Sterling. Of course, she was perfect for him, polished, pedigreed, and pliable. I sank onto my lumpy sofa, the crinkled eviction notice a hot, sweaty ball in my palm. The invitation itself was a work of art, thick cardstock with silver leaf and the scent of expensive perfume. It felt obscene in my struggling artist apartment. Then I saw his note tucked inside on a smaller card, his familiar sharp handwriting a stiletto to the heart. "Ilara, I know this is unexpected, but as I and Isabel plan our special day, we keep coming back to the music. And when I think of music, I still think of you. Your voice was the soundtrack to a very important chapter of my life. It would mean the world to us if you would perform at our ceremony. The song we had in mind is Our Northern Star. We can, of course, discuss your professional fee. I know things have been difficult for you lately. Yours, Julian." The rage came first, a hot, coppery taste in my mouth. Our Northern Star. The song I wrote for him on our first anniversary, a deeply personal ballad about finding your one constant point in a spinning world. He wanted me to sing our song as he married another woman. It wasn't a request. It was a power play, a final cruel twist of the knife, and he knew it. The casual mention of my difficult situation was the salt in the wound. He wasn't just offering me a gig. He was offering me a lifeline, knowing full well he was the one who had pushed me overboard. My best friend Maya, a fiery-haired tattoo artist with zero tolerance for bullshit, was on the phone 2 minutes later. "You have to be kidding me," she seethed after I read her the note. "This is next-level psychological warfare, Ilara. He's not just your ex, he's your former patron, your former landlord, your former everything. He's a puppeteer, and he just found your strings again. You cannot do this." "I have to, Maya," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "The fee he's offering, it would cover my rent for a year. It would get me out of this hole. I can record a new EP. I can start over." "At what cost? Your dignity? Your sanity?" "What dignity is there in being homeless?" I shot back, my voice cracking. "He has all the power here. He knows it. He's cornered me and he's enjoying the view." The truth of it settled in my bones, cold and heavy. This wasn't just about money. Julian wasn't just flexing his financial muscle. He was asserting his continued ownership of my talent, of my art, of the most intimate parts of my past. He needed to prove to me and to everyone else that even after everything, I was still his to command. My voice, the one thing I had left that was truly mine, was just another asset he could purchase. The power imbalance was a chasm between us. He stood on one side atop his corporate empire, while I teetered on the edge of ruin on the other. He had systematically dismantled the career he'd pretended to build for me, ensuring I was left with nothing. No contacts, no money, no confidence. He hadn't just broken my heart, he had tried to break my spirit. Now he was offering a gilded cage as a solution to the poverty he himself had orchestrated. I smoothed out the eviction notice on the coffee table. The black, impersonal letters stared up at me. Then I looked at the elegant invitation. One was a threat, the other a twisted sort of salvation. But they both felt like chains. That night, sleep offered no escape. I dreamt of standing on a vast, empty stage. A single spotlight pinned me down. An audience of masked faces watched in silence. Julian was in the front row, holding Isabel's hand, a smug, satisfied smile on his face. I opened my mouth to sing, but no sound came out. My voice was gone. He had taken that too. I woke up in a cold sweat, the dream clinging to me like a shroud. A decision had formed in the dark, desolate hours of the night, a tiny, hard kernel of something that felt dangerously like a plan. If Julian Thorne wanted a performance, I would give him one. He wanted to own my voice, to put it on display as a trophy of his conquest. He thought he knew the song. He thought he knew the singer. But he had no idea what I was capable of. He had left me with nothing to lose, and in doing so had given me a strange, terrifying kind of freedom. I would sing at his wedding, but I would not be singing his song. I would be singing mine. The memory of how it all began was a ghost that haunted the corners of my cramped apartment. It was a cruel counterpoint to the present, a reminder of a time when Julian Thorne's attention felt like sunshine, not a spotlight. 2.5 years ago, the Green Mill was my church. I'd take the stage, bathed in the dim honey-colored light, the smell of old wood, stale beer, and history thick in the air. I wasn't singing for fame or money then. I was singing because it was the only way I knew how to breathe. That night, I sang an original Cobblestone Heart, a raw, bluesy number about the walls we build around ourselves. My voice, a little husky from a lingering cold, filled the room, and for a few minutes the usual clinking of glasses and low hum of conversation quieted. When I finished, the applause was polite, standard for a Tuesday night. But as I stepped off the small stage, a man stood from a table in the shadows. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. He moved with an unnerving stillness, a predator's grace. "Ilara Vance," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the air between us. It wasn't a question. "I'm Julian Thorne." Of course I knew who he was. Everyone in Chicago knew. Thorn Industries was a behemoth, its logo stamped on skyscrapers, philanthropic galas and political campaigns. He was the city's crown prince, rarely seen in places as beautifully gritty as the Green Mill. "Your voice," he continued, his dark eyes intense, analytical. "It has texture. It tells a story before the lyrics even begin. It's a crime that you're singing to a room of ghosts." I was floored, disarmed by the directness, the sheer force of his presence. "We all have to start somewhere," I managed, clutching my guitar case like a shield. "Starting is for amateurs," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Talent like yours should be launched. What do you want, Ilara? Truly want?" No one had ever asked me that so directly. Not my parents, not my friends. I mumbled something about just wanting to play my music, to connect with people. "Think bigger," he commanded, not unkindly. He handed me a business card, the stock so thick it felt like a credit card. "Call me tomorrow. I have some people I think you should meet." And just like that, he was gone, leaving a faint scent of expensive cologne and the crackling energy of possibility in his wake. That was the beginning. He swept into my life like a force of nature, rearranging everything. Within a month, I was out of my dingy walk-up and living in a chic apartment in River North that he paid for. He called it an artist's stipend, a way for me to focus solely on my music without the distraction of waiting tables. He introduced me to legendary producers, A&R executives, and session musicians I had only ever read about. He bought me a vintage Martin guitar, telling me my music deserved to be played on an instrument with a soul. He was intoxicating. He was brilliant, driven, and utterly captivated by my art. He'd sit for hours in the studio, just listening, his focus absolute. He'd dissect my lyrics, not to criticize but to understand, to find the deeper meaning I'd hidden between the lines. He made me feel seen, not just as a singer but as an artist. My creativity bloomed under his attention. I wrote a torrent of new songs, each one better than the last, fueled by the dizzying romance and the belief that I had finally found my place in the world. Our northern star was born one rainy April night in his penthouse. We were curled up on a white leather sofa, the city lights a glittering tapestry below. I had been playing with a melody on my new guitar, and the words just flowed out, a pure, unfiltered expression of my love for him. He was my constant, my fixed point in a world that had suddenly started spinning at a dizzying pace. When I finished, his eyes were shining. He kissed me, a deep, possessive kiss that left me breathless. "That song, Ilara," he whispered against my lips. "That's ours, forever." But looking back now through the clear, painful lens of hindsight, the red flags were there, fluttering at the edges of the perfect picture he'd painted. They were subtle at first, a suggestion to change a lyric because it was too revealing, a comment about my stage outfit being a little too desperate for attention. He'd frame it all as professional advice, a strategy for building my brand. He was the businessman after all. He knew how to sell a product. And I, it seemed, was the product. The cage, though golden, began to reveal its bars. He discouraged my friendships with other local musicians, calling them amateur distractions. He convinced me to stop playing at small clubs like the Green Mill, arguing that it devalued my brand to perform for free. My world, once sprawling and messy and filled with my own choices, began to shrink until it contained only him and the career he was designing for me. The power imbalance was a slow, creeping poison. He wasn't just my boyfriend, he was my benefactor. Every meal, every piece of equipment, every opportunity was a gift from him. It created a debt I could never repay, a sense of obligation that silenced the small, dissenting voice inside me. I started writing songs I thought he would like, choosing melodies I thought were more marketable. The raw, honest musician from the Green Mill was being polished, packaged, and tamed. The final chilling sign came about 6 months before the end. A major record label had expressed serious interest, An executive, a woman named Clara, wanted to fly me out to LA to discuss a deal. I was ecstatic, bouncing off the walls with excitement. This was it. The dream. Julian's reaction was lukewarm. "It's a good first step," he said, reviewing the email over my shoulder. "But they'll try to own you, Ilara. They'll change your sound, control your image. We need to be careful." He insisted on handling all the negotiations himself. He flew to LA alone. He came back a week later with a grim look on his face. "The deal wasn't right," he announced. "They wanted complete creative control. I turned it down. For you." I was devastated, but I trusted him. He was protecting me, I thought. He was keeping my art pure. It was only after he left me, when I tried to contact Clara at the label myself, that I learned the truth. Her assistant informed me that Clara had left the company months ago. When I finally tracked Clara down on LinkedIn, her response to my message was polite but confusing. "I'm sorry, Ilara," she wrote. "We were very excited about you, but your manager, Mr. Thorne, informed us you had decided to take an indefinite hiatus from music to focus on your personal life. We were sorry to lose you." The blood drained from my face as I read the message. An indefinite hiatus. He hadn't protected me. He had sabotaged me. He had never intended for me to be launched. He only wanted me to be his. My success, if it wasn't mediated and controlled by him, was a threat. He hadn't been building me a stage. He'd been building a beautiful soundproof box where I would sing only for him. And when he grew tired of his songbird, he simply opened the door and pushed me out into the cold, taking the cage and the key with him. He had stripped me of my contacts, my confidence, and my career, leaving me with nothing but the ghost of a dream. And now he wanted one last command performance. He wanted to see his songbird perform on cue one more time, just to prove she still knew who her master was. The days leading up to the wedding were a strange purgatory. Julian, ever the efficient businessman, had his assistant, a brisk woman named Caroline, arrange the details. A check with a staggering number of zeros was messengered to my apartment. The first half of my professional fee. It arrived in a Thorne Industries envelope, and as I signed for it, I felt a familiar cocktail of shame and relief. The check sat on my kitchen counter for a full day before I could bring myself to deposit it via my banking app. The moment the funds cleared, a weight I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. I paid my 3 months of back rent, my utility bills, my credit card debt. I bought a week's worth of groceries without checking the price of every item. For the first time in a year, I could breathe. But the air I was breathing felt tainted, bought and paid for by my humiliation. Caroline also sent over a schedule and a contract. The contract was ironclad, stipulating the song, Our Northern Star, and the performance time. There was even a dress code, subtle elegance, muted tones. They didn't want the help upstaging the bride. The schedule detailed a single rehearsal at the venue the day before the wedding. My name was listed not as Ilara Vance, but as ceremony vocalist. I was an invoice number, a line item in a multi-million-dollar wedding budget. My evenings were spent in a battle with myself. I'd sit at my dusty Yamaha keyboard, my fingers hovering over the keys. I needed to rehearse, to find a way to sing Our Northern Star without my voice breaking, without choking on the memories embedded in every note. Playing the opening chords was like pressing on a bruise. The melody, once a source of comfort and joy, now felt mocking. The lyrics I had written with such sincerity, like a sailor lost at sea, I chart my course by what you are to me, were now a bitter irony. He was no one's northern star. He was a black hole, pulling everything into his orbit and crushing it. I tried to sing it, but the words caught in my throat. My voice, my only real asset, betrayed me. It came out thin and shaky, a ghost of its former self. After a dozen failed attempts, I slammed my hands on the keys, the dissonant chords screaming into the quiet apartment. I couldn't do it. I couldn't sing his lies. That's when I turned to the new song. It had been living inside me for months, a tangled knot of grief and rage I couldn't unravel. It had no name, just a collection of lyrical fragments and a haunting minor-key melody that came to me in dreams. Now, it felt like the only true thing I had left to say. Writing it became my secret act of rebellion. Late at night, with the city asleep, I would sit at the keyboard and let it all pour out. I didn't write an angry diatribe or a predictable revenge anthem. That's what he would expect. That would make me the crazy, bitter ex-girlfriend. No, this had to be smarter, sharper. It had to be a story, told with such grace and quiet devastation that the truth would be undeniable. I wrote about a master architect who built a beautiful house for a rare bird. I wrote about how he lined the cage with gold and velvet, and how the bird sang for him, thinking the house was a home, that the cage was a throne. I didn't use his name, I didn't use mine. I used metaphor and allegory, crafting lyrics that could be interpreted in multiple ways, but whose real meaning would be crystal clear to him, and, I hoped, to anyone who was really listening. The final verse was the hardest to write. It wasn't about anger, it was about release. This golden cage, it cannot hold a thing it didn't buy, the architect. He owns the house, but he will never own the sky. And tonight my wings remember how it feels to truly fly. It was a declaration of independence, a quiet reclaiming of my own narrative. As I pieced the song together, I felt a flicker of the old Ilara, the girl from the green mill, returning. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it was joined by something else, a fierce, defiant resolve. Maya came over one evening with a bottle of cheap red wine and 2 plastic cups. She found me hunched over the keyboard, scribbling lyrics on a napkin. She listened quietly as I explained my plan, her expression shifting from worry to a kind of awed respect. "You're a goddamn warrior, you know that," she said, pouring the wine. "But Ilara, are you ready for the fallout? This isn't just Julian. This is his family, his company, his entire world. They will close ranks. They could ruin you." "He already did ruin me," I said, my voice steady. "Or he tried to. The worst has already happened. All I have left is my story. He wants a performance. He's paying me to stand on a stage with a microphone in front of all the people whose opinions he cares about. He's handing me the weapon and pointing it at his own chest. I'd be a fool not to pull the trigger." "It's not a trigger," Maya said softly, her eyes searching mine. "It's a key to let yourself out of that cage for good." Her words resonated deep within me. She was right. This wasn't about revenge, not really. Revenge was about hurting him. This was about healing me. It was about taking the narrative he had tried to control and writing my own ending. The rehearsal was at the wedding venue, a sprawling, historic estate on the North Shore, overlooking a turbulent Grey Lake, Michigan. The ballroom was breathtaking, with floor-to-ceiling windows, crystal chandeliers, and an army of florists arranging mountains of white roses. I felt small and shabby in my jeans and sweater. Julian was there, standing with Isabel and her mother. He looked impossibly handsome in a cashmere sweater, the picture of relaxed wealth. Isabel was a porcelain doll, beautiful and fragile, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She gave me a brief, dismissive glance before turning back to the florist. Julian walked over to me, his familiar cologne preceding him. "Ilara, glad you could make it." His tone was proprietary, as if I were a caterer he had hired. "The check cleared," I said, my voice flat. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he masked it with a charming smile. "Good. We just want everything to be perfect. No surprises." He looked me directly in the eye, his gaze a warning. "Just the song we discussed. It means a lot to Isabel." The lie was so effortless, so smooth, it almost took my breath away. He was using her as a shield, hiding his own cruel sentimentality behind his fiancée's supposed wishes. "Don't worry, Julian," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "It will be a performance no one will ever forget." I walked to the small stage where the string quartet was setting up. I ran through the first verse and chorus of our northern star for the sound tech. My voice was clear and controlled. I sang the words, but they felt like a foreign language. My heart wasn't in them. It was somewhere else, waiting in the wings, clutching the new lyrics, the true lyrics, ready for opening night. As the empty, pretty notes of the song echoed in the vast, empty ballroom, I saw Julian nod in satisfaction. He turned back to his bride-to-be, squeezing her hand. He had heard what he wanted to hear. He had no idea he was applauding his own executioner. The day of the wedding arrived with a sky the color of a bruised pearl. A chilled, damp wind blew in off the lake, rattling the windows of the historic estate and making the perfectly manicured gardens seem bleak and unwelcoming. It felt fitting. I was given a small, sterile room in the staff wing to prepare, a green room that was more like a closet, with a single chair and a mirror framed with bare, unforgiving light bulbs. It was a world away from the lavish bridal suite where Isabel and her flock of bridesmaids were being pampered. From my window, I could see the guests arriving, a river of dark suits and jewel-toned dresses flowing into the grand entrance. They were the titans of Chicago's financial and social scenes, the people Julian had paraded me in front of when I was his pet project. Now I was just the hired help, invisible. I wore the dress I had bought with his money, a simple, long-sleeved column of dark charcoal silk. It was elegant and understated, perfectly adhering to the muted tones requested in the contract. My hair was pulled back in a low, simple knot. My makeup was minimal. I wanted to be a blank canvas. I wanted the only thing people to see, to hear, to remember, to be the song. The knot of fear in my stomach had tightened into a cold, hard stone. What if my voice failed me? What if I lost my nerve? What if they just cut my mic? Maya's words echoed in my head. They could ruin you. But then I thought of the eviction notice, of the soul-crushing year of rejections, of the casual, devastating cruelty in Julian's note. He had built his new life on the rubble of mine. He deserved to have the ghost of that destruction pay him one last visit. A wedding coordinator with a headset and a clipboard knocked sharply on my door. 5 minutes, ceremony vocalist. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked through a maze of back hallways, the scent of expensive perfume and hothouse flowers growing stronger with every step. I could hear the low hum of hundreds of conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses. Then I was standing in the wings of the grand ballroom, hidden behind a velvet curtain, looking out at the scene. It was more opulent than I could have imagined. The chandeliers dripped with crystals, casting a warm golden light over the sea of faces. The aisle was a carpet of white rose petals. At the end of it, on a raised dais, stood Julian. He looked regal and confident in his custom tuxedo, a king in his court. He was smiling, but it was his public smile, the one he used for cameras and shareholders, charming but with no real warmth. He was performing just as much as I was about to. The string quartet began to play. The procession started. I watched the bridesmaids float down the aisle, followed by the flower girls. Then the music swelled, and everyone stood. Isabel appeared at the far end of the ballroom, a vision in white lace and diamonds clinging to her father's arm. She was beautiful, undeniably, but as she walked towards her future husband, her eyes fixed on him, I saw a flicker of something in her expression. Not just joy, but a kind of anxious possession, the look of someone who has finally won a coveted prize and is terrified it might be taken away. They stood together on the dais, holding hands. The officiant began to speak, his voice droning on about love and partnership. I didn't listen to the words. I watched Julian. He looked at Isabel, but his eyes seemed to be looking right through her. He squeezed her hand at the right moments, smiled when he was supposed to, but there was a disconnect, a hollowness to his actions. I realized with a sudden, chilling clarity that this marriage was not about love for him. It was a merger. Isabel Sterling was not his partner. She was an acquisition, the perfect pedigree-approved accessory to complete the image of Julian Thorne, the powerful, successful scion. And me? I was the final flourish. Forcing his broken-hearted ex to sing at his wedding was the ultimate demonstration of his power. It was a message to everyone, and especially to me. I own it all. Your art, your heart, your past, it all belongs to me. Then it was my time. The officiant announced, "And now, a special musical performance, a song chosen by the couple to commemorate their union." I stepped out from behind the curtain and walked to the microphone at the side of the stage. A single soft spotlight found me. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes turning in my direction. I didn't scan the crowd. I didn't look for anyone I knew. I looked directly at Julian. Our eyes met across the cavernous room. For a split second, his charming smile faltered. He hadn't expected me to look at him, to challenge him with my gaze. He expected me to be a demure, sad little prop. I saw a flicker of surprise, then annoyance, before he smoothed it over, turning his attention back to his bride. But I knew he was still watching me from the corner of his eye. The pianist with the string quartet began the simple, familiar opening chords of Our Northern Star. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My palms were slick with sweat. I took a deep, steadying breath, gripping the microphone stand until my knuckles were white. This was it, the point of no return. I opened my mouth and began to sing. The first verse was exactly as he remembered it. My voice, clear and pure, filled the silent room. In a world that spins too fast, in a love I thought would last, you were the stillness in the air, a silent promise, an answered prayer. I sang the words with a detached, melancholy precision. I saw Julian relax, a faint, smug smile touching his lips. He squeezed Isabel's hand, whispering something in her ear, probably telling her this was the song his little protégé had written for him. He thought he had won. He thought the performance was going exactly according to his script. I sang the first chorus, my eyes still locked on his. You are my northern star, my steady guiding light, the one true thing that's burning in the blackest of the night. And then, as the last note of the chorus hung in the air, the pianist, following the secret instructions I had given him during our brief rehearsal, shifted. The melody changed. The key dropped into a haunting, unfamiliar minor. The tempo slowed to a funereal pace. I saw the confusion on Julian's face, a slight furrow in his brow. He looked from me to the pianist and back again. The guests began to murmur, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Isabel's perfect smile wavered. I took another breath, and as the new melody began, I closed my eyes for a moment, letting go of the fear. I was no longer the ceremony vocalist. I was Ilara Vance, and this was my story. I opened my eyes, looked directly at Julian Thorne, and began to sing the truth. The shift in the music was a palpable thing, a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure that made the air in the grand ballroom feel thick and heavy. The sweet, predictable melody of Our Northern Star dissolved, replaced by a sparse, melancholic piano line that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. The murmuring from the guests grew for a moment, a wave of confusion, before a profound, expectant silence fell over the room. Every eye was on me, but I was only looking at one person. Julian's face was a mask of controlled fury. His eyes, which had been so smug moments before, were now narrowed, dark slits of disbelief. His hand, holding Isabel's, tightened, and I saw her flinch almost imperceptibly. He knew. In that instant, he knew this was not a mistake. This was a coup. My voice, when it came, was different. It was no longer the clear, polished instrument he had tried to cultivate. It was raw, imbued with the husky texture of pain and resilience, the voice of the girl from the green mill, resurrected. There once was an architect of marvelous design, I began, my voice low and steady, each word a carefully placed stone, who found a bird and told her, "Your sweet song will now be mine." The allegorical nature of the lyrics was my shield and my sword. It wasn't a direct accusation, but a story, a dark fairy tale unfolding in real time. I could see the guests exchanging puzzled glances. They were trying to place the song, to understand the sudden somber turn. He built a cage of twisted gold and swore it was a throne. He clipped her wings and told her, "You will never sing alone." He filled her dish with diamonds, so she'd never have to look at the lonely, starving artists in the pages of his book. Julian's knuckles were white where he gripped Isabel's hand. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle flexing from across the room. He was trapped. To stop me now, to cause a scene, would be to admit the truth of the song. He had to stand there and take it. His perfect wedding day turning into a public indictment, with his bride and all of his esteemed guests as the jury. I watched Isabel. The color had drained from her face. Her eyes darted from Julian to me and back again, a dawning horror in her expression. Was this the first crack she was seeing in his perfect facade? Or was it the first time she was being forced to acknowledge something she had long suspected? The prize she had won was beginning to look tarnished. The second verse came, my voice gaining strength and conviction. The bird, she sang him love songs, for she knew no other tune beneath the fabricated sun, the artificial moon. He showed her off at parties, a jewel upon his wrist, a pretty living trophy, whose own soul he had dismissed. This time there were audible gasps. I saw Julian's mother, a formidable woman in dove-grey silk, put a hand to her chest. Several of Julian's business partners, men who had seen me on his arm at countless events, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They were connecting the dots. The pretty living trophy was standing right in front of them, singing her testimony. The string quartet, following the new sheet music I'd given their pianist, swelled behind me, adding a layer of tragic grandeur to the melody. The music was a mournful tide, and my voice was the lonely ship upon it. I was no longer just singing, I was testifying. My personal heartbreak was transforming into a universal story of control, of power, of being silenced. Then came the bridge, the moment where the story turned from the past to the present. My voice dropped to an almost whisper, forcing everyone to lean in, to hang on every word. But cages, they grow rusted, and silence has a sound, and a bird who's known starvation has its ear down to the ground. He thought her wings were broken, that her spirit had been tamed. He forgot that in the silence a brand new song is framed. Julian took a half-step forward, a silent, menacing gesture for me to stop. But I held his gaze, refusing to back down. This was my stage now. He had paid for it himself. I took a deep breath, pouring every last ounce of my pain, my anger, and my newfound freedom into the final verse. My voice soared, filling every corner of the opulent ballroom, no longer a whisper, but a powerful, soaring declaration. This golden cage, it cannot hold a thing it didn't buy, the architect. He owns the house. But he will never own the sky, so thank you for this final stage, this last requested plea. You didn't buy my silence, you only set me free. As the last three words, "set me free," echoed in the vast room, I didn't let them hang with triumph. I let them fall with a quiet, devastating finality. The music faded into a single, sustained, sorrowful note from the cello, and then silence. A profound, deafening silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The air was thick with unspoken thoughts, with the wreckage of a perfectly curated public image. I had not screamed or cried or thrown accusations. I had simply told the truth, wrapped in a melody so beautiful and sad it was impossible to dismiss. I had turned his power play into my emancipation proclamation. I looked at Julian one last time. The mask was gone. His face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated rage and humiliation. His empire had been shaken, not by a rival corporation, but by a girl with a guitar and a story he thought he had buried. Beside him, Isabel slowly, deliberately pulled her hand from his. My work was done. Without a word, without a bow, I turned and walked off the stage, my footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, through the wings, down the back corridor, and out a side door into the cold, clean air. The wind from the lake hit my face, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could fly. The immediate aftermath was a blur of motion and sensation. I didn't run. I walked, my steps measured and deliberate, out of the estate and down the long gravel driveway. The cold air felt like a baptism, washing away the cloying sweetness of the ballroom's flowers and the suffocating weight of Julian's world. My heart was still pounding, a wild drumbeat against my ribs, but it was the exhilarating rhythm of adrenaline, not the frantic beat of fear. I didn't look back, but I could almost feel the shockwaves emanating from the building behind me. I imagined the frantic whispers, the hasty damage control, the wedding coordinator speaking urgently into her headset. I had just thrown a grenade into the most meticulously planned day of Julian Thorne's life, and the shrapnel would be hitting everyone in that room. My phone, which I'd left in my coat in the staff room, was a dead weight in my pocket. I didn't dare look at it. I didn't need to. I knew it would be a war zone of texts and missed calls. By the time I reached the main road, the grey sky had opened up and a light, misty rain began to fall. It was fitting. I hailed a cab, the driver giving my elegant dress a curious look. "O'Hare," I said, the destination coming to me in a moment of pure instinct. I wasn't going to the airport to flee. I just needed to go somewhere anonymous. Somewhere filled with the motion of people moving forward, away from their pasts. I needed to disappear into a crowd. Inside the cab, the quiet was a relief. The city lights smeared across the rain-streaked windows. I finally allowed myself to tremble, a delayed reaction to the immense pressure of the last hour. I hadn't just performed a song, I had detonated my own life, or at least the life Julian had defined for me. What came next was a terrifying, exhilarating unknown. Later that evening, sitting in an anonymous airport bar with a club soda, I finally dared to look at my phone. 117 notifications. Most were from Maya, a frantic string of all-caps texts. "OMG, what did you do? Are you okay? They cut the live feed of the wedding. Call me!" There were missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and then there was one, single text from a blocked number. I knew it was from him. My thumb hovered over it, a strange mix of dread and morbid curiosity churning in my gut. I opened it. "You will regret this for the rest of your life." The words were cold, flat, and utterly devoid of emotion. It wasn't a threat made in the heat of passion. It was a promise. A corporate guarantee of my future ruin. A year ago, that text would have shattered me. Now I looked at it, took a slow sip of my drink, and deleted it. He could no longer hurt me with threats of a future he controlled, because I had just taken that control away from him. Over the next few days, the story began to leak, not in a torrent, but in carefully curated trickles. The Thorne and Sterling families were masters of public relations. There was no mention of the incident in the society pages, which ran glowing, generic articles about the fairy tale wedding. But gossip is a weed that grows in the cracks of even the most well-paved facades. Maya became my conduit to the outside world. "Okay, so here's the official story," she reported over the phone a few days later. "The Thorne PR machine is claiming you had a distressing emotional episode on stage. They're spinning it as a tragic, unstable ex-girlfriend moment. They're painting you as delusional and him as the poor, benevolent victim who only tried to help you." "Of course they are," I said, a weary resignation in my voice. "But," Maya continued, her voice dropping conspiratorially, "it's not really working. Too many people were there. A video, a really grainy one taken on someone's phone, is making the rounds in private group chats. You can't make out all the lyrics, but you can hear the music change. You can see the looks on their faces. The story is getting out. And Ilara, people are taking your side." That was the part I hadn't expected. I had anticipated being excommunicated, blacklisted, and branded a pariah. And to a certain extent I was. The producers Julian had once introduced me to were suddenly unreachable. The doors he had opened were now firmly slammed and bolted shut. But something else was happening. The video, as grainy as it was, went viral in smaller independent music circles. Bloggers and indie music journalists started writing about the wedding singer who sang her truth. They didn't have all the facts, but they had the core of the story. A powerful man, a silenced artist, and a moment of public rebellion. My name, once whispered only in the context of Julian Thorne, was now being discussed on its own merits. The most shocking development came a week after the wedding. An email appeared in my inbox with the subject line, "From the mother of the groom." My blood ran cold. I expected a tirade, a legal threat, a venomous diatribe from the family matriarch. With trembling hands, I opened it. "Ms. Vance, I am not writing to condone the disruption you caused at my son's wedding. It was a deeply unfortunate and public affair. However, I am also not a fool. I have watched my son operate his entire life. I have seen his ruthless need to win, to control every narrative, to possess everything and everyone in his orbit. What you did was an act of profound courage. It was, I suspect, the first time in a very long time that anyone has told Julian the unvarnished truth to his face, without fear of the consequences. He will try to destroy you for it. Do not let him. That song you sang, it was more than just a song. It was art born from pain. The world needs more of that kind of honesty. Do not contact me again. I wish you well. Eleanor Thorne." I read the email 3 times, the words blurring through my tears. It wasn't an offer of help. It wasn't an alliance. It was something far more valuable. Validation. From the most unexpected source imaginable, it was an acknowledgement that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't delusional. I was telling the truth. Eleanor Thorne had seen her son for who he was. And in that moment of public humiliation, she had seen me too. She hadn't intervened, and she wouldn't. She was loyal to her family, to the empire. But in her own quiet way, she had just confirmed everything. She had witnessed the aftermath, the silent, furious drive home, the shattered bride. She knew the song wasn't an episode. It was a reckoning, and it was long overdue. The months following the wedding were a study in contrasts. On one hand, Julian's promise of my ruin was being quietly, efficiently fulfilled. The mainstream music industry, so intertwined with the kind of corporate money and power the Thorne family wielded, became a fortress I couldn't breach. Every door was closed. My name was poison. To hire Ilara Vance was to invite the wrath of Thorne Industries, and no one was willing to take that risk. The golden cage had been replaced by an invisible wall. But on the other hand, in the cracks and alleyways of that fortress, something new was growing. The grainy cell phone video of my performance, stripped of its original audio and set to a studio version of the song I recorded on my own dime, became an underground anthem. I called the song The Architect. I uploaded it to Bandcamp and YouTube, with no promotion, no label, just a simple title and my name. It found its audience. Women who had been in controlling relationships, artists who had been stifled by patrons, anyone who had ever felt their voice being taken from them, they heard themselves in my story. Emails and comments poured in, not just from Chicago, but from all over the world. They were messages of solidarity, of gratitude for giving voice to their own silent battles. I hadn't just sung my story, I had sung theirs. I used the rest of Julian's fee, my severance package I had started calling it, to rent a small studio space and record an entire EP. The music was raw, stripped down, and unflinchingly honest. It was the album I was always meant to make before Julian had tried to sand down my edges and polish me into something marketable. My big break, however, came from an unlikely source. A woman named Clara, the record executive Julian had claimed rejected me, reached out. She had started her own small independent label in Nashville, focused on authentic singer-songwriters. I saw the video, she said over a Zoom call, her voice warm and direct. And then I heard the architect. Ilara, what my former assistant told you was true. We were ready to sign you 2 years ago. Julian Thorne told us you had quit music. He sent us a forged letter, supposedly from you, turning down our offer. He said you wanted a quiet life out of the spotlight. He killed the deal. Hearing it confirmed, so plainly, was like having the air knocked out of me. It was one thing to suspect it, but another to hear the concrete, brutal truth. Why would he do that? I whispered, the question I had asked myself 1,000 times. Control, Clara said simply. He didn't want to launch you. He wanted to own you. Your success, independent of him, was the one thing he couldn't tolerate. It's the mark of a deeply insecure man, the kind who builds empires to hide the fact that he feels like nothing inside. But he made a mistake, Ilara. He underestimated you. He thought he was burying you, but he didn't realize you were a seed. Clara offered me a record deal. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar contract. There were no lavish perks or fancy apartments, but it was real. It was a partnership. It offered me complete creative control. I signed it without hesitation. A few months later, I was preparing for my first real tour, playing small, sold-out clubs in cities across the Midwest. One night, after a show in Milwaukee, as I was packing up my guitar, a woman approached me. She was older, impeccably dressed, and had a familiar, elegant bearing. It took me a moment to place her. It was Isabel's aunt, a woman I had met briefly at a handful of Thorne family events. "Ms. Vance," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I was at the wedding. What you did was remarkable." "Thank you," I said, wary. "I feel there is something you deserve to know," she continued, her eyes filled with a kind of weary sadness. "About why Julian was so insistent you sing that particular song. It wasn't just about humiliating you." She explained that in the months leading up to the wedding, Isabel had become increasingly insecure about my past relationship with Julian. She was haunted by the idea that I was his great artistic love, and that she was merely a convenient, strategic match. She had found my old demos, including Our Northern Star, and became obsessed with it, playing it over and over. Julian knew this, the aunt said, her voice dropping. He saw her insecurity, and he used it. He convinced her that forcing you to sing your song at their wedding would be the ultimate proof that he was over you, that the song and you meant nothing to him anymore. It would be a performance of his power over his own past, all for her benefit. He turned his cruelty towards you into a supposed gift for her. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. It was a level of psychological manipulation that was almost breathtaking in its complexity and cruelty. He hadn't just been hurting me, he had been manipulating his own fiancée, playing on her deepest fears, all to feed his own ego. The wedding wasn't a merger of two people. It was the hostile takeover of a new soul. "Are they—" I couldn't bring myself to finish the question. "Divorced?" she said with a sharp nod. "Isabel left him 2 months after the wedding. Your song wasn't what broke them, my dear. It was what illuminated the cracks that were already there. You gave her the courage to see the architect for who he really was. You didn't just set yourself free that day." As she walked away, I felt a profound sense of closure. My fight had never truly been with Isabel. It had been with Julian and the suffocating world he represented. In the end, my song had been a key for both of us. My tour took me to Chicago a year to the day after the wedding. I was playing at the Vic, a venue 10 times the size of the Green Mill. The show was sold out. As I stood in the wings, hearing the roar of the crowd chanting my name, I thought about the journey, the eviction notice, the gilded cage, the silent scream that became a song. Taking the stage, bathed in warm, bright light, I looked out at the sea of faces, strangers who felt like friends. They knew my story. They had helped me write the new chapters. I was no longer a ceremony vocalist or a pretty living trophy. I was just Ilara, and I was finally free. I stepped up to the microphone, my vintage Martin guitar feeling like a familiar friend in my hands. I looked out at the crowd, smiled a real, genuine smile, and began to sing. Ilara's story is a powerful reminder that our voices are the one thing no one can ever truly take from us. She walked into her ex's wedding as a victim, a ghost of the past he thought he could control. But she walked out as the author of her own story, a survivor who turned her deepest pain into her greatest power. Her song didn't just expose a toxic man. It sparked a movement of truth and liberation, proving that the most powerful stage is the one you build for yourself. What did you think of Ilara's incredible act of courage? Let us know in the comments below. If her story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true life stories that will shock and inspire you.